Jasmine, how are you today?
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on and talking about everything we can't say
We're going to talk about that.
on the hush hush, but now we're bringing it to the world. I mean, this
Yeah.
is several months in the making, a platform
Yeah.
to change conversations in our world.
Yeah.
Um, what sparked this project?
I remember talking to you last July, maybe May, I want to say, and it was right after uh, George Floyd was killed, and there were tons of Black Lives Matter protests happening across the country. My station at the time has an internal committee where it's very welcoming. Everyone can come to it. Happens once a month where they meet and essentially they try to go over, culture and just different things that are going on with inside the station, outside the station. It's a pretty open environment, right? But we were having this one meeting that was right after all the protests got started, and so this was going to be a big one for like Black journalists to really come forward and just talk about how it's impacting us, right? I could not attend this meeting because I had to anchor that day. So I instead wrote a letter, and it was first person and very personal. I mean, I talked about my experience growing up as a Black woman. I talked about things I noticed inside the station when it comes to just the treatment of Black people, the way we tell stories on communities of color. I talked about how the George Floyd protest was impacting me personally, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And it was very honest. And I had someone in that meeting read my letter out loud. And so after that, I heard back from several of my Black colleagues who had said, that letter really helped us open up as well and be able to talk freely and feel like we're in a safe environment. I heard from my white coworkers who said, I'm so glad that she brought this forward because I had no idea and I really learned something from you. And so I was very nervous about writing this letter and about having it read out loud, right? Because it's still my work environment. But I just felt the need to do it. And I noticed that a lot of my Black coworkers were having these kinds of conversations behind the scenes, but never really bringing them forward. And so I wanted to recreate that experience where you can be honest, tell your story, have a voice, but not have to fear retaliation in some kind of way, right? And so that's how everything we can't say started. That's where the whole idea came from.
I think the world was in such a deep and dark place at that time for a variety of reasons, especially being in a pandemic with a
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter movement. And journalists were thrown into the fire, into this fold of not only being Black, but covering these stories. So we were all wrestling with these thoughts, like you said. Why did you feel compelled to kind of open this up not only to your station, but then branch it out even larger to create a company to change these narratives?
Yeah, I think it's because there was a lot of bottling up, and I realized, everyone says, we want change, we want change, we want change, we need this to happen and such and such. But the truth is that if you're thinking about a business or a company in any industry, it doesn't have to be news, it can be anywhere. The business and the company will not change until its customers demand a change, right? Um, and so for us, our customers, quote unquote, or our viewers, so until viewers really understand what happens behind the scenes, why it's so important that it's not just you're seeing Black faces on TV as the anchor and reporters, but you see Black producers, you see Black executive producers, you see Black people working in the sales department, you see Black news directors, Black general managers, right? Until you start seeing that, those are the people who are really in control of not just hiring, but the product that goes out there, the words and phrases that we use, how stories are told. And so I just felt like there was just this necessary need, not just to have the conversation and talk about what's happening, but also to bring and invite the public and the outside world in so that they can too be educated and to demand change.
Did you think though that these real and these raw conversations that would be put into letters, did you think that everyone had these sorts of feelings, and I know we were able to connect, and people from around the country who are Black are going to have some of the same sentiments. But did you really grasp how much this affected all of us?
Not really. I mean, I think on a honestly, just as a Black woman, okay, like you kind of have this yeah, I get it, sis. Yeah, I get it, bro. Right? Like you have this sort of connection of like I've been through something too.
It's
But
like the head nod
the
syndrome.
head nod, right, it's like we get it, right? But the extent um that was coming through in these letters, I mean, really blew my mind, and it's not just a uh, this personally impacts me, or I went into kind of emotional breakdown mode because of what happened to me at work or covering these stories. But it's also things like companies putting out a viewer profile, if you will. That was one of the letters that came through, and that viewer profile was mainly a white woman, of a certain age. And so this person had written that we got this profile, right? We were told by management that this is what all your stories need to be geared to.
Mm.
Basically, what that means is that anytime you have communities of color or anyone outside of that profile where a story may not directly impact or directly relate to, in this situation, white women, the story was not getting told. So you are missing entire communities, which is a very, very big deal when you think about how diverse our world is, right? And so, that person's in a situation where it's like, okay, I want to tell Black stories. I want to tell the stories on communities of color, of diverse communities, but I can't because management has told me this is my lane, this is my box, this is where I'm going to stay in. And you think about, I think people really underestimate the power of the news, the power of the media. We are in very powerful positions. What we say, the images that we use, the videos that we use, and how we tell a story affects what is recorded in history. So if we say it one way, if we use the same image of a Black man, a Black man's mugshot, more than we use any other person of color, right? What kind of stereotype are you feeding the viewers, and what is going to be written down in the history books? It's all connected. And so that's why this project was so important in bringing things to light.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think morning television at least is going for that demographic of 30 to 50-year-old white woman, maybe a stay-at-home mom,
Right.
that
Right.
demographic.
And
Which
I
is
will say this, there was a survey done in 2020 that showed that Black people are the number one group of people that watch the news.
mm,
So it's not a situation where um, we feed our stories toward a specific because we feel like this is where the money is or the advertising is, and whatnot, or this is who's watching. It's not that, right? And because there are Black people who regularly pay attention to the news. We are the number one viewers out of
especially in
every
our
other
local
group.
communities,
Yes,
especially in
especially
our
in our local
local
communities.
communities. And to see a national story and uprising and protests of Black people for Black people last year was pretty eye opening, to think that we've gone through so many years of police brutality and kind of the same narratives, not necessarily knee on our necks, but this has been happening. Now, when I watched it, when you watched it, when the world was watching this unfold with the George Floyd video, did you think that it would change the world like George Floyd's daughter said last year? Did you ever think it would come to this?
You know, Sadly, no, because because the problem wasn't just George Floyd. The problem is the system in place. So, for example, if you don't have that video, if we think about, I was just having this conversation with another journalist. You think about the original press release that came out of the Minnesota Police Department on George Floyd, right? Said nothing about officers being involved in some kind of confrontation, said that he had received medical attention. I mean, it was like one paragraph. It was very short and it did not relay what actually happened by far, right? If you don't have that video, we're not having a conversation about George Floyd.
No, we're
And
not.
so think about how that plays out in the system itself, right? It says the system has to have a blatantly visual presentation in order to prove that there is police brutality, that there is things that Black people have to go through and experience. And so until you change that system, you get more cases. And yes, I think, you know, George Floyd is sort of the face right now, at least when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, which is, you know, rightfully so. I'm not taking away from that. But you think about every other case that doesn't have video,
Right.
that doesn't have that kind of proof, that doesn't have several witnesses in the street, where it's not as public. I mean, it's a different kind of conversation that you're having.
Yeah, but the big thing about this as well, though, we look at a Rodney King, we saw him get beaten.
Yeah,
We look at an Eric Gardner. He said, "I
yeah,
can't breathe" 7
right.
years ago.
Yeah.
What was it about 2020?
I think it was because there was something about that visual. There was something about the fact that it wasn't quick. You know, you're talking about 9-ish minutes of watching this happen, right? It wasn't a gunshot, you know, something that was painful to watch. And it just sent chills through you. And on top of that, I think there was something about the fact that it wasn't just one police officer in that situation, right? You had three more that were right around him that could have stepped in
On
some kind
top
of
of
way. Right, exactly. That could have stepped in and said, get off, right? Like, no, this isn't happening, right? We need to do things. You're taking it too far. I mean, anything could have happened. And I think, you know, at this point, right, it also happened to come at a time where you're talking about Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and, you know, everyone's in the pandemic. And so people are paying attention more so to their screens. So I think it's just kind of the context and the timing of when it happened all played a role in it. But from a Black journalist standpoint, nothing that we saw is new to us, right? But it is something that we often have to suppress, and then we often have to, well, we covered it and this is it. And we move on until the next one and the next one, and the next one. I mean, I pray and I hope that this isn't just this whole race and culture and diversity and inclusion that tend to be very trendy hashtags.
Yeah.
I
I
hope
mean,
that
it's,
it's
it's
not
a
just a
2 week
trend.
phenomenon that,
Right,
they sent out
right,
a letter
right.
and a statement.
Exactly. And I hope that, you know, it's not something that just totally disappears in 6 months just because you don't see any more public police brutality cases, right? I think it's a constant, consistent, ongoing conversation that needs to be had, which is why I asked Black journalists to write these letters, so that we can move forward and really understand what exactly needs to change.
So how can these letters push anything forward? We're talking about, we want systemic changes in newsrooms, in society. How can these letters do that?
Well, I was having a conversation with another journalist, a friend of mine, and she talked about how there was a real difference in how the news treats when Black people go missing and when white people go missing. Usually white people get tons more coverage, and Black people, you maybe you might get a little article or something, but there's a difference. There's a big difference. So anyway, she was in a situation where this Black trans woman was missing, and it was very clear that the family had said, this is our daughter is a Black transgender woman. This is who she is. This is who's missing. The sheriff at the time refused to refer to her as a woman, kept saying, no, he's a man. He's
Mm.
a man. He refused to be in that situation, right? And it was interesting because we so often interview officials, right? A lot of times that's a big part of our job. We interview police, we interview lawyers, we interview politicians. And a lot of times we kind of just take their word for it, right? What they say is what it is, and we put it in a quote, and then
It's
that's it.
because of the title. I
Right.
mean, honestly,
Right. Because of the
what
title,
we're
right?
doing. Yeah.
Because there's supposed to be this understanding that, hey, what he's saying is totally true, right? And this is right. So I think, that was a letter that I got, and that starts a whole conversation about how, as journalists, how do we keep people in power accountable? When do we need to start questioning? When do we need to look into reports? Because if that video of George Floyd did not come out, I can absolutely guarantee you that there was going to be media across the country, or even just in Minnesota itself, that just said, okay, well, here's the police report, nothing major, you know, uh, move on. And that would have been it. It
Yeah.
would have never done anything different. So, that's the little things that I'm talking about. People bringing different things in our industry to light forward, where it's not just, okay, we need to respect Black people, we need to hire more Black people, we need to make change, right? It's not just these generic things, but it's like, no, 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 let's be nitpicky about this. Let's figure out how many times we use mugshots and how we use mugshots. Let's talk about when we refer to something as a riot versus a protest. Let's talk about how do we go about keeping people in power accountable? What are the questions that we need to start asking? Do we just take what they say? How can we go about improving that, right? So it's answering those kinds of questions, and you can't answer those questions alone. You need the public's input. You need white journalists, other journalists of color. You need managers. You need executives. You need them to be a part of these conversations, because we all play a role in it.
So the conversations can help with that accountability. That's the
Yeah.
$1 million term right now. That verdict that we saw last month with Derek Chauvin, accountability is the word we're hearing over and over and over again. Will these letters, and especially having celebrities and people who, Black journalists who are prominently out
Mhm.
there, will that help with the accountability? Is that sort of the goal of pushing this forward?
I mean, that's the hope, right? That's what we want. I think it's not just the letters that we provide, because I wanted to make sure that this platform was something that was welcoming, that was something that everyone felt like they could join and listen in. So as you're listening, you're going to hear stats, you're going to hear research, you're going to hear these conversations given in context of what this means. You're going to hear from a variety of different kinds of people in every aspect of journalism. And on top of that, we have a monthly book club, right? So we really try to push education, because the truth is, you can't go out and change things about things that you just don't know about,
Yeah.
right? If you don't know, you can't speak out about it. It's better to get that understanding. Example, I had a white journalist write in a couple months ago, and it was during February, so Black History Month. And she was concerned because she looked around at her shift and she said, there are no people of color, there are no reporters of color on my shift. So if a Black History Month story is going to get done, I've got to be the one to take this on. But she said, I don't want to get it wrong.
Mm.
I want to get this right. And she said, I don't want to offend anybody. And I don't want to come across as, I'm putting it on someone else's shoulders to tell me what to do. But I really need some help here, because I take this seriously. And she said, where should I look? How should I tell these stories? What can I do? Right. I posted that letter, and I got tons, if not hundreds, of Black journalists who responded with resources, with links, with ideas on how, don't just cover the Martin Luther King March, right? Which always gets a ton of PR and media attention, right? It happens across the country in every city. But look for places in the Black community where stories haven't been told, right? Give those people a voice and a chance to speak out. And on top of that, look at how you can possibly break something out where it's not just in February, where you're telling it 365 days a year, right? So when you have those kinds of conversations, when you have those kinds of a sense of openness and a sense of welcoming, I mean, think about how much better of a journalist that white journalist is
Mm.
because of the resources that she was able to get just out of a single letter that she wrote in.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a little unsettling that there are so many newsrooms with such little diversity.
Mm.
And for her to open up and to bring that to you, I think is just amazing. And for a Black journalist to give her that feedback about how she can tell these stories is great. But we still need people in the room,
Right.
and for to have people in the room in some of these places, to have them not be willing to open up and share their thoughts and share their experiences. How does that make you feel with starting this platform?
I mean, I think it's a necessary thing. And our focus for everything we can say is Black journalists right now, which, by the way, make up about 13% of the workforce in local TV news, and that's nationwide. In comparison, white journalists are in the 70% percentile. But that's just you're talking about Black journalists. You didn't even touch Asians, Native American, Latinx. Those are the kinds of that's what you're saying. All the rest of people of color are significantly below that 13%. So it just goes to show you're not just talking about needing more Black people in the room, but you're just needing more diversity. You're talking about we need more of just different voices that are coming forward. When I saw the several murders down in Atlanta that were targeted at Asian Americans. And there was a conversation on Twitter of, we got to make sure we're pronouncing the victims' names correctly, right? Um, Luckily, I saw an Asian journalist who got on Twitter and social media and actually was able to record herself pronouncing the name so that we were able to follow, which is an amazing thing. It shouldn't be lenient on her just to post that video on how to pronounce certain names. If you have more Asians in the industry, at your station, at your network, right? You don't have to go look around on Twitter and figure out, okay, how do I pronounce this? Because you're learning from someone right next to you, right? And that's what we need. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement in terms of getting more culture into our industry.
Yeah, and I think that's a big one too, with the sensitivity of some of the themes that you're seeing in the letters. Is that why, you made them anonymous? Because there could be this backlash. If we're talking about stop Asian hate, and an Asian
Mhm.
journalist sends in a letter and she's not anonymous, then she might get some of that hate. What is the purpose behind having these letters be anonymous?
Well, a lot of people don't know, but contractually, for pretty much anyone on TV, but for sure, in journalism, even if you're behind the scenes, you are contractually bound by what you can and cannot say. If something's happening internally in my at my station at my network, I cannot talk about that publicly. Um, if I do, you're talking about job loss, right? And there's also a sense of journalism is supposed to be, unbiased. It's not supposed to really be about us. It's supposed to be about the people in our stories that we're talking about, and it should. It definitely should. This project doesn't take away from that at all. It just says, look, if we do better internally, we can do better with our coverage. We can tell better, stronger stories. So this isn't just for us to vent out and get it all out on paper. It's also for our viewers, right? We want to give the right kind of information. We want to tell the right kinds of stories. And the better we can get at putting more diverse faces inside internally, the better we are at doing the rest.
Well, Jasmine, I just want to thank you for coming on the show, sharing the platform and the project with us. I have Black journalists who will be watching and listening to this, and journalists of color, especially, who are going to be maybe a little bit hesitant because of how big this platform can be and what it could mean for their jobs and their livelihoods. So, as your final words, what do you say to the journalist who's hesitant to open up, to be raw, and to share these things publicly, although they are anonymous?
Yeah. Well, this platform is for you. This is a chance for you to get a space where you have an honest voice, right? We do a very thorough verification process. We take um, great responsibility in protecting the names on these letters, right? Because the goal is not to call someone out. The goal is not to make a statement on what some organization does. That's not the goal. The goal is to receive more information about what's happening behind the scenes and therefore educate the public. And the truth is, in order to do that, we don't need someone's name and face on these letters, but we do need very real experiences to make sure that we tell uh, the right story, right? To make sure that we can make a change in the industry. So, my message to the other Black journalists, who might be hesitant or thinking about writing a letter is, hey, we are open. We're very transparent. You can reach out to us on all of our platforms if you have any questions whatsoever. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody about it. But really, this is for you, and it does make a difference. Um, when you start seeing white journalists comment in and write questions, and you see viewers comment in and write questions and say, we want to know about this, we want to know about this, that's when you know that your story, it really does have power. And that's the main message. Speak your truth.
Everything We Can't Say, www.everythingwecan'tsay.com, will be a link in the description of this video and of this podcast episode. Jasmine, thank you so much for sharing our stories and making our feelings and sentiments heard in order to create change, which is a big goal of this platform as well. So I thank you so much for working long and hard on this project. Wish you the best of luck, and we will definitely, be talking about this more and more and
Yeah.
more. Is there anything else that you would like to leave us with?
Just thank you for having me on. Be sure to also follow our Instagram account at Everything We Can't, and send us in those letters. We tell us what we should talk about, what our episode should be about. We want to hear about it all. So I really just appreciate everyone's time and support.